Good evening. It's fallen quiet, which means that we're probably ready to begin, doesn't it? My name is Sam Young. I'm Assistant Head in charge of enrichment, and very, very happy to welcome you this evening to another instalment of our Enlightening Minds lecture series, the first one of 2025. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming, either in person or for joining us online via the live stream. It's our second year of Enlightening Minds, and it is designed to nurture and ignite intellectual curiosity across the entire King's community. So it's great to see pupils here, to see parents, and I know there'll be more pupils, parents, staff, alumni joining online as well at home. For those of you that are here in person, and particularly, I guess, those people who may be upper fifth pupils or parents of upper fifth pupils, you remember that the fire alarm went off at Parents' Evening on Thursday. I'm really hoping that that is not going to happen again this evening, but in the unlikely event that it does, I and my two kind of pupil helpers over there, we will help you. We'll be mustering on the first 15 rugby pitch. We are delighted to be able to put on these intellectually inspiring talks free of charge to members of the King's community. Thank you to those of you who have, when you booked your ticket, kindly donated to the school's bursary fund. If you haven't already done so, then please do consider doing this retrospectively via the King's community page of the school website. And finally, before I hand over to our pupil hosts, I'd just like to flag that the Q&A that there will be a Q&A at the end of this evening's talk. And for those of you joining via the live stream, then you can engage by asking questions of your own via X using the handle hashtag KCS Enlightening Minds. So once again, thank you very much for being here tonight, for supporting the Enlightening Mind lecture series. And I'm now going to pass over to Faye and to Max to introduce this evening's speaker.
It's our pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Professor Dawn Bonfield, a true pioneer in engineering and sustainability. She's a Professor of Practice in Engineering for Sustainable Development at King's College London, where she focuses on empowering youth to engage with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Her work extends far beyond the classroom. She is President of the Commonwealth Engineers Council, a board member of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, and Deputy Chair of their Women in Engineering Committee. Professor Bonfield has been a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion in engineering throughout her career, founding the non-profit Towards Vision, as well as International Women in Engineering Day, and serving as past president of the Women's Engineering Society.
She trained as a materials engineer and has since worked with prominent organizations such as Citroën and MBDA, and was honored with an MBE in 2016 for her commitment to promoting diversity within the engineering community. Today, Dawn will explore the critical role engineers play in creating a sustainable future, especially in face of global issues like climate change, as well as discussing how creativity and sustainable values in engineering can help meet the UN Sustainable Goals by 2030.
Well done, you two. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's very good to be here. It's great to see you all on a Monday night and be part of this community of people coming out to hear talks on a Monday when you could be elsewhere. So thank you very much for doing that. So I'm Dawn Bonfield, and I have to admit that I caught some of the previous Enlightened Minds sessions this morning. Actually, I was a little bit late doing my homework on this, and what I realized is that they are actual lectures given by experts, whereas mine is more of a perspective from my own point of view and my own experience. So I hope that's going to be okay for you. And as you will have heard, I work on diversity and inclusion in engineering, and I don't think I've ever given a talk at a boys' school before. I know it's a co-ed school in the sixth form, but up until that point. So we will see how it goes down. So I'm interested to see how you take it, really, what you think about it. So this is who I am. So I'm a materials engineer. So I did a materials science degree. These are all some of the things that I do now. I'm sort of here, I guess, because I'm a Professor of Practice at King's College London. And I was due to give a talk at King's before Christmas, which this was the follow-on from, I suppose. But I also work at Aston University. I work on a degree apprenticeship programme at Aston for engineers. I'm a professor at Bath University as well, and I work on some entrepreneurship work there. But the thing that takes a lot of my time really is the work that I do with the Commonwealth Engineers Council and the World Federation of Engineering Organisations. So I'll sort of tell you a bit more about these various different roles that I have as we go through the evening. So just as a bit of context to my career journey, I suppose, I started, as I said, as a materials scientist at Bath University. So I wasn't an engineer from the start, but then I went from there to a normal engineering career, really. So I worked in manufacturing. So I worked for Citroën Cars, the Atomic Energy Authority, then British Aerospace, and then in the defence sector. And I worked on composite materials, so carbon fibre composite materials, and my job was based on the manufacturing of those materials, so looking for optimization of the properties of those materials. And what you will probably know about carbon fibre composites is they're lightweight. So really they're used in applications where you're trying to reduce the weight. So one of those applications was the car engine, and I worked on the piston head of the car engine, trying to get a thermal gradient, a ceramic piston head to produce a thermal gradient so that you could run the engine more efficiently at a higher temperature, because the piston itself is made from aluminium, and then the ceramic on the piston head means that you can run it hotter. So that was a sort of typical career, I suppose, in engineering and engineering manufacturing. But when I got to the sort of midpoint of my career, I had a family when I was working in the defence industry, and things started to go wrong for me then. I mean, if you talk to any woman who works in engineering, there'll be stories, lots of stories that they will tell you about the culture of engineering, which is in a process of change and needs to go further. But I came out of engineering sort of proper at that time and went into a very sort of different career path. I went to work for the National Childbirth Trust for a while, and then I went into my own institution. So what I wanted to do was get back into materials. So one way of getting into any role is to volunteer for a job with that organisation. And I volunteered. I wanted to go to the conference, the Materials Congress. And so I volunteered to be like a runner in that conference. And from there, one thing led to another, and then I started to become employed in that organisation as a conference producer. And then following that, I went to work for another charity called the Women's Engineering Society, or WES, where I then became the Chief Executive Officer and sort of transformed that organisation, which is over 100 years old now as an organisation which supports women in engineering, basically, and does a lot more than that. I'll tell you more later, hopefully. But then from there, what I realised is that you will probably know in engineering that engineering is a profession that is underrepresented. Women are underrepresented in the engineering profession. And I started to realise that we do a lot of work, and this Women's Engineering Society has done work for 100 years to get to sort of promote engineering to women. But what we didn't really have a good handle on was why we needed to do that. What was the reason why we needed more diversity in engineering? So then that took me on to a role as what I now call an inclusive engineer. So I work on inclusion in engineering, and that's what took me to Aston, and then that's what then brought me to King's. I'm telling you the whole story, all in the wrong order, I think, but they're the bits that I suppose I'll come on to. So engineering, this is my friend Sophie Harker at British Aerospace, and this is your sort of definition of engineering, very sort of dry definition, I suppose. One of the most important sectors in the UK, covers a huge range of areas, many different entry points and many pathways into engineering. So yeah, very dry definition of engineering. But what actually is engineering? It's one of those terms that certainly in the UK we don't necessarily have a good handle. I mean, you might be different because you're in a school where you're very well informed, and you no doubt have very good teachers and careers teachers, and you probably know very well what your pathways are into engineering. But in the general population, we don't necessarily know what engineers do, because in the UK it is not a protected qualification. So anybody can call themselves an engineer. In lots of the countries I work in, it's a very well respected and protected qualification, so it's part of your identity to call yourself an engineer. But in the UK, that's not really the case. So what do we think engineering is? You know, and I'm happy if anybody wants to answer that question, but I want you to just think about, what is your definition of an engineer? Do you have a good idea of what sort of thing an engineer does? So I wonder if anyone's brave enough to say what they think an engineer does, or who an engineer is.
I would say designing and making things. It's a simple way of looking at it, but that can be lots of different things, so from roads to manufacturing to building.
Yep, exactly. Design. So the answer, designing and making things, a huge range of different things. Any one other idea what engineering is, or what engineers do? Yes, please.
Mechanical or electrical or electronic solutions.
Yes. So very sort of discipline specific. So mechanical engineering or electrical or electronic solutions, you said. So yes, absolutely, they're the disciplines of engineering. But I'm talking to you more about engineers as leaders and as change makers in the future world. So for me, these are the things that describe an engineer. So an engineer is somebody who is creative, who uses their imagination to design and build, as you say, and to solve problems and to find problems to solve. Develop, manufacture, fix, repair things, manage things. But if you add these words, so doing those things in a way that is sustainable, ethical, inclusive, safe, fair, responsible, purposeful, these are all the attributes of a future engineer. And I remember I work on, the thing I do these days, I describe myself as being an inclusive engineer. And I was at an event talking to a guy, a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, about my role, what I did. And I remember him, he's an older chap, and he was retired, and I said what I did around inclusion. And he said, well, I don't understand it these days. You know, it used to be so simple. We wanted to build a road or a bridge. We just went and dug a hole, built the bridge, and, you know, that was the end of it, basically. If people could afford it and they wanted it, then that was all we had to think about. And he's saying, now you're telling me that we need to do things ethically and sustainably and, you know, inclusively, and all of these new things that are coming into engineering. And it's absolutely right. Engineering is a very changing profession. And if you look at this graph of the stages of human development, you will see how we have used engineering and technology to progress, to make the huge strides that we've made in developing the world that we live in today. And I work, as you said earlier, in the Commonwealth and in the World Federation of Engineering Organisations. It's absolutely not the case that they have used engineering to the same extent that we have. And that, in some ways, is why they respect engineers more, because they still see it as being the driver of change and of progress in their countries. We've sort of got to a level in the UK where we take the built environment, the environment we live in, for granted, and we forget that it has been built over these years by engineers and technologists. You know, back down in the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, you know, these are materials, and sometimes it's very difficult to explain to people what material science is. But back then, when we relied on materials for our progress, then they knew very well what metals did and what the different strengths and why materials were important. So then when we went on from transforming materials, we went on to transforming energy, using steam power, using combustion power. Then later on we came to the information age, so transforming that information that we use, and now where we are today, it's all about information, isn't it? Data, artificial intelligence. So that's how we've progressed, and the populations around the world have progressed in the same curve, if you like. So as we've used engineering and technology, we have grown as a population, a world population. But today, engineering in the UK has a bit of an image problem, in that it is, I think the image of engineering is stuck in the image we had in the past, where we thought of it as sometimes a dirty profession, or one which was very predominantly male, and still is actually, but where we link it to engines maybe, and factories and heavy industry. One of the quotes that I like best is from Amy Johnson. Now, I said I worked at the Women's Engineering Society, WES, and she was a former president of the Women's Engineering Society, and she was also an aviatrix, she was called at the time, an aviator, a pilot, and she had lots of the records at the time for flying from London to Australia and London to America. And this is what she said back then. She said, "The only argument that men can bring forward against women's intrusion is that of physical strength, but this seems to me a very poor grounds for establishing and retaining a monopoly. After all, physical strength is purely relative. There are some women stronger than some men. In engineering, there are many jobs beyond a man's strength, and what does he do? He fetches an instrument. And what did I do when I found a job beyond my strength? At first, I used to fetch a real man engineer, and if he couldn't do the job, then he'd fetch some tool that would, and I soon learned that it saved time to fetch that tool right away." And that's just sort of indicative of how women at the time were trying to break into this world of engineering, and how difficult it was for them to become accepted, if you like. One of the things that they did actually, and one of the things that I've been doing recently, is celebrating the centenary of the formation of the Electrical Association for Women. And this is a group who tried to promote electricity to women in the home, not engineering women, obviously, just women who worked, who lived in, houses, and had to have the sort of drudgery of the manual tasks that they had to do, the domestic tasks that they had to do. And the organisation tried to help them understand electricity and use that electricity to help their lives, to remove that drudgery. And the women back then really did know that engineering technology was there to create better lives for them. And they promoted so much more use of energy and electricity. And it's been really interesting looking at that centenary, to look at how our relationship with energy and power is changing today, and how today we are trying to use less and less energy rather than more and more energy and electricity like they were at the time. So it's been really interesting to see how the times have changed. But engineering needs to change. We know that we've got the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and we know that we need to act immediately on those crises. We don't have enough engineering skills. If you work in any part of engineering, you will come across these figures, facts and figures all the time that tell us how short we are of engineers. Down at the bottom here, 124,000 new engineers needed annually, 400,000 roles in clean energy. But the education system is still one that is rooted in the past, and we still educate engineers in the same way we have done for a long time. But what the world looks like today is based on this sort of rapidly changing context, where we're down here, we had COVID, which was a huge shock to the world, but the reality was that compared to the other things that are coming behind, climate change, biodiversity, war, you would bring further down this curve, wouldn't you? Because we're in a world now where we have a lot of conflict around the world, but these waves are coming towards us, and we are not ready. We've got artificial intelligence as this sort of big looming cloud as well, which we can use to our benefit or not, depending on which way we go. So it's a very different world where we have these very different visions of how we need to interact with these much bigger issues that weren't around previously. And if you just look at the carbon emissions increase, you'll see how the carbon emissions have gone up since the Industrial Revolution down here, all the way up. And every few years we have something like the United Nations Rio, the Earth Summit, or the Kyoto Protocol, or more recently the Paris Agreement in 2015. These have all been attempts to limit the amount of carbon that is emitted into the atmosphere, but they've made very, very little difference. We have still continued on this growth that you can see on that chart, but we need to get to net zero by 2050, or else we will not contain the planet at the temperature that we need to, which is 1.5 degrees. We've even surpassed that now. So the sooner we act on this, the better. So we need engineers who will get us from the top of that curve to the bottom of that curve, that red line there, as steeply, as quickly as we can. And they are very different people than the ones that got us up that curve. So the future engineer looks very different from the engineer of the past. And I suppose what I'm saying tonight, the message I'm saying is that you are the future engineers. I'm hoping, I'm told that you have a lot of people from your school going into engineering and already hearing that you're thinking of engineering as a possible career. This is what we need to understand, and this is the sort of set of values, if you like, that we need to build our future engineering system on. So we do have some hope. So we've got these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, can I just, with a show of hands, ask how many of you are familiar with these goals? Fantastic. That is really encouraging to see that. I work at King's. I did this with our second-year engineers, undergraduate engineers, a few weeks ago, and 40% of them said they'd never seen these before, and an extra 30% said they'd seen them, but they didn't know what they were. Now, this is our blueprint for the future. So this is the way we will ensure that we're not leaving people behind with the engineering solutions that we come up with. They are based on these, maybe you know this already, and I'm sorry if you do, but they're based on these Millennium Development Goals that came about in the year 2000 when we came over to the new millennium. 8 of these Millennium Development Goals never really caught on, though. They never had the sort of global buy-in that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that came about in 2015 did have. And the SDGs are often split into these different areas of 5 Ps, they're called, the 5 Ps of sustainable development. So people, prosperity, sometimes called profit, planet, peace and partnership. So, they're very easy to see what they're aiming at. And one of the things that we've just done, I'm part of a future skills group with the Royal Academy of Engineering, which is our sort of umbrella academy for engineering in the UK. One of the things that we've just done there is done a future look of what we will need from engineers in 2030. And they just happen to come out in these same areas of people, planet and prosperity. So we really are using those SDGs as our guide, if you like. So this is how engineering is changing. It's becoming this much more multifaceted discipline. Systems thinking is the new buzzword in engineering, and addressing these wicked problems, the ones that don't have one particular solution, that have often very many solutions, that all of which are a compromise. And it also needs to be more inclusive. It doesn't have the diversity it has. And we need leaders in engineering. So this systems thinking approach, this is all about how we become less sort of focused. Engineers used to, one of the traits of an engineer, and we used to do this quite often actually in education, would be to look at, I don't know if you ever do those Myers-Briggs personality traits, and you get a set of personality traits, and you can associate different careers with different personalities, and the engineer was always the one that had the attention to detail and was very keen on problem solving, and was always sort of had their head down, looking inwards at the problem. But what's happening now is that we're talking more about these T-shaped engineers. So rather than having to have those very focused skills, which we sometimes don't need anymore because we have CAD, computer-aided design and artificial intelligence, we don't necessarily need to have that focus on the calculations and the things that we used to do. We can start to look more broadly and have that better peripheral vision and become much more of a systems thinker and understanding how things behave, what things, how you can see patterns in things, how you see relationships and consequences, what the feedback loops are, so the impact of things, synthesis rather than analysis, and thinking in systems and understanding where the system's boundary is, rather than doing your own little bit and then passing it on to someone else in a different profession. Now we have to work at those boundaries between those different professions much more than we used to do, and think about outcomes rather than outputs. So, what will change as a result of you doing this, rather than what will you actually produce? And I think, we are encouraged as engineers. Previously, as an engineer, you would be encouraged to point to the skyline and say, there's the Shard, and I worked on the Shard, or I did that really fast car there. I think engineers are more and more being encouraged to see the sort of societal benefit that they are giving to the world, really, rather than the sort of big, shiny buildings. I'm not anti-growth necessarily, so I don't want to give too much of the wrong impression. We all need buildings, but so this sustainable, this future where we have people at the heart, where we're thinking about what it is people need and how we can use engineering to solve their problems. These are some of the global trends from Arup, and this is a slide that's full of information and not very interesting to look at. But if you just read some of through those global trends, you might think, well, this is engineering, and what's engineering got to do with the aging population or obesity or the housing shortfall or mental health? But these are the things, when we're thinking about systems, these are the things that we as engineers need to be addressing. So rather than just digging that hole in the ground like maybe a civil engineer used to do, we need to be asking ourselves questions about, okay, so what else can that bit of engineering help with that society needs? How can this infrastructure take the data cables that we need? How can we make sure that we're sort of having multiple purposes for the same bit of engineering that used to be very simple? Now we're having to think, okay, what are the consequences of building something, and how can we make sure that it addresses some of these other global issues that we've got? So that's why it's really good to have this much broader view of the world and of the systems that we need to think about in the systems engineering. And this is the donut from the Kate Raworth Donut Economics book. Have you seen this before? Have any of you seen this before? Okay, so what this is saying, and this is a model that lots of engineering departments use, really. So what it is saying is that as a society, we need to live in that green donut, which is the safe space for us to live in. And if we surpass the ecological ceiling, then we are putting pressure on the planetary boundaries. And you see around the edge here what those identified planetary boundaries are. So climate change and ocean acidification, chemical pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus loading of water. So they're the ecological, the environmental ceiling. And also we need to ensure that we don't fall below the social foundations. And the things that in white written inside the donut are the indicators, if you like, of what our social foundations are. So, you know, social equity, political voice, peace and justice, education, food, water, energy, you know, the real basics. And the really interesting thing about the donut is that for each country, you can have a look at a country and see what that country looks like in terms of how far you've passed the ecological ceiling, or how far you've fallen below the social foundation. And if you look at the UK, you know, we barely fall below the social foundations very much. We do on gender equality, actually, but in most cases we live within the safe space here, but we do massively overshoot the ecological boundaries. Whereas if you compare this diagram with a country in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, they're nowhere near surpassing, they don't surpass any of their ecological boundaries, but they fall well short of their social foundation. So you can see the impact, and of course climate change, it isn't limited to countries, to country boundaries. Carbon will not respect any boundaries. So this is a planetary issue. So it's really important that we understand what we as engineers do to make sure that we are not making the planet worse. So this paper, that's a good point. This is a paper that you are probably more familiar with than me, embedding sustainability into the curriculum. But in the engineering side, the Engineering UK also does a science education tracker. And this is some of the headlines or the key findings from that tracker. So the first few are just a bit of context. So engineering technology are of vital importance. We've talked about all of those. Women and girls are underrepresented. We need to attract more people. But some of the things it's indicating is the interest in school science has declined since 2019, and this gender gap has opened up. School students are doing less practical, maybe not here, but I think this is the trend. And what it's saying about this gender gap is that now 12% of girls think that engineering fits well with who they are. 16% of girls think engineering is suitable for them. So, you know, surely engineering is suitable for everybody. You know, we must all realise that anybody can do anything these days. 36% of girls say science is not for them. There's been a 10% decline in 11 to 14-year-olds, old girls, saying that they are interested in science compared to a 1% decline in boys. So this last statistic is the red flag in the engineering world, if you like, the sort of engineering education world, because that is a massive decline in number of girls thinking that they are interested in science. And you will have seen this leaky pipeline where girls drop out of science at the first opportunity they possibly can. I'm not going to go into any of the details of this, but basically what it's saying is we see, if we're trying to encourage more people into engineering, we see where the big drop-offs are in the number that are eligible to go into an engineering career. Interestingly though, looking at the number of students who are interested in climate change, what we see is a third of school students say that they're interested in reducing the impact of climate change. Now, would you have thought that was about right, or do you think that's a pretty low figure? Maybe I'm looking at the staff in the school, but does that seem about right, or how do you feel? How do you feel as students about climate change? Are you interested in reducing the impact of climate change? Would you say, put your hands up if you would say yes, you are interested in reducing the impact. It's not like you don't have to be. You are interested, okay? Yeah, that's good to hear. But if you look, it's quite interesting actually, if you look closely at this graph here, you can see how girls and boys in school see these different parts of climate change and biodiversity and sustainability, if you like, differently, the different kind of gender relationship, if you like, that they have with these different things. So climate change, 38% of boys and 47% of girls. Biodiversity loss, 37% of girls, 25% of boys. Where there are no figures, I think they're pretty even. Transport that has less impact on the environment is the only one, I think, where boys have a higher percentage than girls. Sustainable fashion, girls 21%, boys 8%. Eating less meat or dairy, girls 11%, boys 5%. So it's just interesting to see the differences in boys and girls' relationship with these topics. Whereas on the other hand, you know, you think, well, girls don't seem to be interested in engineering, but girls are certainly interested in the environment. So, you know, what's going on there? Are we not giving the message that engineering is a topic that allows people to go into working on the environment? You probably are not remotely interested in these statistics, but this is something that I suppose interests me. But in terms of women in engineering, the headline statistics are that we have 10% of girls doing vocational qualifications, 9% of girls doing engineering T-levels, 16% of girls doing engineering apprenticeships, 19% do degrees, and in the engineering workplace, 15.7% is the first time in many, many years that figure has come down. So it has been steadily rising for very steadily rising, because it's only at 15%. But last year it was a percentage point higher than this. And the reason for that is more women are leaving the profession than are coming in at the bottom end. So we have some changes to make in engineering. These are just for interest, really. These are the T-level occupations by specialism. So I'll just leave that up for a second if you want to have a look. The men are the pink line, which is slightly confusing, really, which is normally the other way around. But you can see that any of the engineering ones have got very few women, whereas the education and early years is the other way around. Health is the other way around. So the reasons why we would choose engineering, this is like an advertisement for engineering. So what I said to you is engineers build the world. We literally build the world around us. The other reasons that we give are that we've got this shortfall of engineering skills, it's equality of opportunity, so that people can have any choice of any career, and it's pretty good salary. But what I wanted to talk to you about next was the work that I do around inclusion. So I said I'm an inclusive engineer, so I work on inclusive engineering, and I define that as the process of ensuring that the engineering products, services and solutions that we provide or we produce are accessible and inclusive of all people and are as free as possible from discrimination and bias throughout their lifetime. So you remember I said to you at the start that I often say that I'm an inclusive engineer, and so I'm going to tell you a bit more about what that means. So if you think about products, and the thing I told you at the start was that when I worked at the Women's Engineering Society, what we didn't do was really have a good narrative about why we needed a more diverse engineering sector. So we were always saying, well, we need more because we don't have enough. But why don't we have enough? So this is the sort of reason, I suppose, why we need to have that diversity in engineering. So if you look at products, engineering has been predominantly male for such a long time that most of what we see around us has been built by one section of the community, if you like, by men. But what that means is the most well-recognised case of products that aren't designed for women are the seatbelts. So that one over there. So seatbelts for pregnant women. There are no standards for seatbelts for pregnant women, which means that they are never safety tested. And they're one of the most unsafe things for a pregnant woman is to be in an accident in a car. Down here on the bottom left are some soap dispensers that don't work if your hands are black, but they do work if your hands are white, because they've never been tested, again, by people with dark skin, because often engineering teams don't have those people in the team to test these products, and they don't have the sort of perception that they need to be tested. The stab vests in the middle are an indication of lots of equipment that is built with only men as the model. But women's bodies are very different to men's, and there are many physiological reasons why they need different types of equipment. Their neck muscles aren't as strong, and in these cases the stab vests don't fit women as well, and so they become more dangerous. Over here, this is Loughborough University, actually, where I just happened to take this picture. I could not reach those charging things because they had just been put too far away for someone with shorter legs to reach. So it's pretty easy to see what inclusion looks like when you're thinking about products. But when you're thinking about technology, sometimes it's very difficult to see the embedded biases in the technology that we've got. And some of the reasons why this is important, well, you know, you'll know about artificial intelligence and how it is starting to dominate the world, and that is based on data, the data that is fed to that artificial intelligence. And looking at that bias, the bias that's in the data that we have, the historical data we have, leads us to allowing the artificial intelligence to predict things poorly, so predict things based on outdated information or outdated values or cultural values. So if you look down here, these are word vectors. So you know the way artificial intelligence works is that it adds the next word on to the sentence, depending on what words are closest to it in these word vectors. So, historically, it's looked at words that are associated with girls versus words that are associated with boys, and can predict very badly. So, giving girls, words associated with girls are often like pretty, smiles, friendly, whereas boys are very much action-orientated verbs, so confident orientated. And so you can see how artificial intelligence will predict the future based on these word clouds. In the middle here, this is technology that doesn't detect, the facial recognition technology that doesn't accurately detect different racial features in people's faces. The same with the top one. These are all improving, so these are improving all the time, but the trouble with them is they are not tested. They don't have a diverse range of people to test these technologies on necessarily. So this is sort of how it would manifest itself in data. But if you look at the built environment as well, it's more about accessibility in the built environment. And if you have people in wheelchairs, or if you use wheelchairs, or you don't have physical accessibility yourself, or even if you push chairs, you'll realize how inaccessible the built environment is. So down here, you'll know on the tube that the number of times you see someone in a wheelchair on our London tube system is almost never. So understanding what accessibility looks like in the built environment is based on having people in your team who understands what that needs to look like. At the top here is New Street Station in Birmingham, and if you have a visual impairment, it's very difficult to walk confidently across that station because it looks like you're walking down steps or up steps. So this is an example of, an example that is shown to be good practice in accessibility, where people who have a problem with, a disability or are in a wheelchair can access the same pathway, if you like, to people who don't have a disability. But part of the problem with this on the top right here, these steps, are that they're very uneven. And so anyone with a visual impairment can't see where they're supposed to be walking and come to the edge of steps where they don't realise they're there. So these are all examples of what inclusion looks like in engineering and in the solutions that we create. These are some examples of hostile architectures where they are exclusive by design. This is the famous one down here where they stopped buses going under this bridge so that they didn't have crowds of people going to the beaches, so that they only had people who were able to drive cars that were able to get to those beaches. But the top left, those benches stop homeless people sleeping on them, and these things here stop people sleeping under those shelters. So this is called hostile architecture, so it's the opposite. But, you know, where you have a properly inclusive built environment, you have spaces where people feel that they belong, and where people have the difference between equality and equity. And any women in the audience will probably recognise this bottom left picture. What are those women doing there? Any ideas what those women are doing on the bottom left? Queuing for the toilet, exactly, yes. It's a common occurrence, isn't it? And I take it you're familiar with this picture here. How many of you have seen this picture here? Great, that's really good to see that. So that is the difference between equity and equality. So equity is the outcomes, it's the equality of outcome, whereas equality looks like giving the same thing to everybody. Whereas equity means everybody has the same outcome at the end of the intervention. But what happens now is the bottom left here, where we give more advantage to the majority, if you like. So down here, and it's still this little guy that gets his outcomes are even worse. But this is engineering. This is the future of engineering on the right-hand side. This is how we need to design our futures, so that we don't have to give these interventions to different people. We come up with different solutions that are accessible to everybody. So this is what we're aiming at, this one over here. I was just going to say, I'm probably getting a bit too close to the end, but I was just going to say, and I will just very, very briefly go over these ones. The work I do with the World Federation of Engineering Organisations is around gender and engineering, and that looks very different when you look at a global perspective, looking at how engineering is being used to ensure that women get that equity or that equality of outcome, because women in the developing world have very different opportunities or access to opportunity and access to independence and access to information. So our engineering solutions can really help those people get the access and the equality that they need. So that's really interesting work that I've run out of time to tell you much about, but one of the things that we're doing at the moment is looking at water, sanitation and health. And the United Nations World Water Report next year, 2026, is on women and water. And so we are thinking about, so how can our engineering solutions help women who have a very different experience with water and sanitation and health than men in the developing world? One way is through these cook bags. These are cook bags that help with their cooking. And this is Lesotho in South Africa. And women there have to collect firewood and collect water and cook on these open fires using these pots that smoke and give them very bad eye problems. And these cook pots are such a really simple solution, but they don't need anything like the amount of firewood or water that those women need for that open fire cooking. So just as an engineer, you will have many more times the amount of impact that you can produce. So if you look at this example of going vegan will reduce your carbon footprint to 2 tons per year. But as an engineer, you have the opportunity to multiply your impact on the climate much more than you can do as an individual. So if you make savings as an engineer, so 10% savings by an engineer is 100 times more impactful than you can do as an individual. So just to say really that it is a really impactful way of helping the world, helping the planet, becoming more sustainable. These are some of the roles that I haven't got time to go through, and some of the industry sectors. And the top skills, I mean, engineering also is very good for transferable skills, and these are the top skills in 2025, but these are the skills of an engineer, so they are transferable to all different sectors. So this is your challenge. So how are you going to make a difference with your lives, with your career? What are you going to do? How are you going to be the change for the future? So how do we take action? So Be the Difference is the campaign slogan of the Royal Academy of Engineering's outreach project for This is Engineering Day. So yeah, I really hope that you will consider engineering and consider the future of engineering and the leaders that we need in engineering for a sustainable world. So thank you very much for listening. You've been very generous to listen to my diversity in engineering part as well. So thank you very much.
So we're now going to do a quick Q&A about the talk, and I'd like to start off with a question for myself. So it's really fascinating to hear about all of the different inequalities within engineering, particularly regarding gender. And I suspect there's probably quite a big disparity between socioeconomic backgrounds as well within the engineering sector. So why do you think that is, and what do you think needs to be done to bridge the gap?
Yeah, good question. There is a big socioeconomic difference. There's also a lot of underrepresentation for people with disabilities, for people with different sexualities. All of the minorities actually are underrepresented in engineering. It's not been the inclusive profession, I suppose, is what I've been saying all along, that we've needed. And I think we haven't done, in terms of gender, I think we haven't done as much as we've needed to do to make engineering inclusive as a culture, but also to explain what engineering is more about. I think we've tended to be quite elitist in engineering, and we've not opened engineering up to the number of people and the diversity of people that we should have done. In terms of socioeconomics, there's all sorts of reasons why more people don't go into engineering. It's disadvantage multiplies in all aspects of opportunity, I suppose. But you know, if you ever try to get an internship as an engineer, so I don't know if you ever do summer internships, it comes down to the same types of things about who you know, how you can get into a company. Do you have the funds to enable you to be a volunteer for a particular company? So yeah, there's all sorts of things I think that prevent people entering engineering.
I was going to ask, what made you want to study material science at university? Because a lot of people here like me are probably still deciding whether and what they want to do at university.
Good question. Well, I did at school, like you, maths, physics, double maths, physics, chemistry, general studies. So that I was never really in any doubt that I was going to do a science. But the way I chose material science was, at the time, there were lots of summer schools. So universities held summer schools that you could go along to and do a week. I did a week at Manchester University, a week at Cambridge, a week at Bath University, and they were all for different aspects of material science. So I just sort of chose the one that I liked based on that. But yeah, do your homework and have a look around. Material science, it's a real, it's a subject that has lost its popularity as people don't really understand what materials are any longer, and we have fewer and fewer materials engineers, which is a real shame because the world is desperately in need of more minerals and mining and critical materials, and it's those mining engineers that are the ones that will understand about how to extract materials. So it's a shame we have so few of them. The UK itself is now trying to find its own lithium again, so that we don't have to import it. So materials is a really interesting and growing topic again, hopefully in the future. But yeah, just in terms of what you're choosing for your degrees, make sure you do your homework, go and look around the different universities and make your choice on your fit with that university. You know, it's not all about, you need to choose the right course. You need to make sure you choose the course that suits you, but also the university that suits you as well. So don't go somewhere where you don't get a good feel for that university. You need to get there. You need to like where you live as well as the university itself. And every university has got a different feel to it. My husband actually is the Vice-Chancellor at Westminster University. Now, Westminster University has such a different feel to most of the other universities I know, but the people, it's a very diverse university, but the people at Westminster have a real sense of belonging, and they go there and they see somewhere they absolutely belong. You will go somewhere as well when you're doing the rounds, and you'll really like the town, the city, the town that you're in, the feel of the university, the course, the people you meet. So really take your time and make your decisions based on that, because that impacts the whole of the rest of your life, depending where you end up at university. And really, when you get there, you really want to give as much as you can. Some of the things I think we see now at university is that it becomes a bit of a transactional relationship with the university, and we have a lot of students, we have a lot of engineering students, and they don't necessarily always get very engaged with the university or the extracurricular things that are on offer. You have that opportunity, and you really need to. I'm sure you will, because you've done that in school. You know how to get involved, and you know how to give your skill to the community and get involved in other extracurricular projects. Do the same thing. And I was the entrepreneur in residence at King's, and a lot of the entrepreneurs that came in to speak to the students said, while you're at university, this is your time to, if you've got any ideas for a business, do it now. You'll never again have that time that you have while you're at university, nor those resources. You've got an army of academics, labs, staff that can help you. So if you've got ideas for solutions, sustainable solutions for the future, think about setting up your own little business or seeing what you can do, enter competitions, because there are plenty of them. So yeah, good question, but really do look around properly and make a good choice, and I'm sure you'll get good grades and we'll have the choice. So that's one of the advantages you've really got.
Thank you. We're going to open up the Q&A to the audience now, and for anyone watching online, you can ask questions via X using the hashtag #KCSEnlightening. Is there any questions from the audience?
I think you mentioned quite early on that in quite a few places in the world, engineering is a protected profession. From your own experiences and the people you've worked with, what effect would you say that has on the appeal of engineering to women, especially young women?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Culturally, engineering is very different in different parts of the world. So parents, and it's really interesting for us to see why in other parts of the world where they have a much higher percentage of women, for example, going into engineering, what the culture looks like in those countries that enable that to happen. The fact that engineering is a protected title gives that respect, and oftentimes it's parents who really want their children to be in professions that will make a tangible difference to the countries that they live in. Here I think earlier that we've slightly lost that relationship with engineers being the ones that build the world we live in, but I think in other countries it's very apparent that the country's wealth depends on that profession. One of the students at King's actually that's doing a master's dissertation said, it's very loud this one, it's got a bit of an echo, said one of the things that here in the UK happens is girls tend to be very good at lots of different subjects, and they are as good as boys at maths and science. Whereas girls are relatively better at other things. So girls often get put into other subjects because they're sometimes better at those, and the boys get put into the maths and science. So it means that the boys are sort of funneled into these maths and science and engineering careers, and the girls are sort of funneled into other things because they're slightly better at those. Whereas what this student at King's was saying happens in India was that whoever is the best academically will be chosen to go into maths and science. So they only take the best students in maths and science, not the ones that, are like in our country, it's sort of, if you're slightly better at something else, you will be put into something else. No, in their country, they all get to be going into maths and science. So it's a totally different culture. And I'm not sure I explained that very well, but it's a totally different culture than we have here. So I think that's part of the reason in our country why we have this drop-off of girls going into subjects that can then lead to engineering. But yeah, the fact that it's a protected title gives a lot more credibility to engineering as a profession, and it's seen more alongside the other sort of professions of, and it's a very trusted profession as well. I think it's, in the UK, I think it's the second most trusted profession after nursing. So yeah, good question though. Any other questions?
Earlier on you mentioned the wicked problems and how they were kind of hard to figure out a solution for those. Are there any examples that you could give? And if there are, have been some of the past that people have solved and how they did that?
Oof, crikey. That's a really hard question, and I've got a complete mind blank. I think I don't know really. I think, some of the things that we talk about today in the, you see it in the news all the time, where I don't think this is the answer to the question that I was going to give an answer that I don't actually think is the answer to that question, but I don't know, maybe some of the things that we think about in the developing world, where we're looking at some of my colleagues in Africa, in the African countries, are on a trajectory of development where they are sitting on a resource, a mineral, critical mineral resource, or an oil well, where they know that they need to develop, and the best way for them to develop is to use the minerals that are at their disposal. So when we try to go into our sort of Commonwealth partner countries and say, well, you should be using renewable materials, you shouldn't be using those critical raw materials that you have, or the oil reserves that you have, then that's a really difficult problem to resolve, because we can't really tell countries that they can't develop at the rate that we've developed, and we've developed using all of those critical materials and the oil and gas. So it's a sort of, that's one of the big problems that we have. How do we ensure that we get renewable energy to a state where it's actually cheaper to use that energy than it is for somebody to use their critical raw materials and their oil and gas. So that's one thing that is relevant to the work I do all of the time, really, to try to find a compromise that allows them to develop without making the world even worse, polluting the environment even more. So it's not an easy situation, solution to that. You have to compromise somewhere along the way. So, but that's a good question. I need to think about a good answer. Thank you.
So you said the UK was trying to get its own lithium resources rather than getting them all imported. Do you have any idea how they are actually trying to do that without expanding their territory?
Well, I think they've got lithium mines still down in Cornwall. So the Cornish lithium is a growing industry. So, yeah, they're just mining it in the way they have done in the past. So things become worth mining when the value of them goes up. So value can either be because it gives you security or because it's a sort of monetary value, if you like. So energy security is one of the big areas that we've understood much more recently with the energy not coming from Ukraine and the Russian conflict. So that energy security within our own borders is something that every country is looking at. And yeah, so that resource that was not as valuable in the past then suddenly becomes very valuable. So it's just that's why we need more sort of materials engineers in the UK. But I mean, I don't know if you've seen the undersea mining that goes on, and you say increasing your territory. Some of these small islands, and the Commonwealth is a Commonwealth of 56 countries, and they're all around the world, and the Commonwealth has half of its countries are very small island developing states. And they have, even though they're very small, they have a lot of territory around the island. So they can become very valuable once you start to extract those critical materials from underneath the seabed. So people are trying not to give away their territory, to try and keep hold of those territories that they've had around the world. So it's a very difficult sort of geopolitical environment, because colonization has meant that countries own bits of the world that aren't close to where they are. So yeah, they are becoming more and more valuable.
You touched on AI during your talk, and I was wondering, in terms of sustainability, how's it being used at the moment, and how will that change in the future? Yeah,
that's a really good question. I don't really know the answer to that. I'm not an AI expert, really, but yeah, I think this is probably one of the last talks that I could ever give that doesn't have a good answer to that, because it is just becoming ubiquitous, isn't it? In every subject. Yeah, I work in the built environment. The trouble is, one of the things that we're, artificial intelligence has that ability to speed up processes because it can recognize these patterns. And where countries are able to use artificial intelligence to speed up the manufacturing of their built environment, they have a huge advantage. And I'm working at the moment on we have this thing called CHOGM, which is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And countries in the Commonwealth are growing at a really, really fast. Cities in the Commonwealth are growing really quickly. So urbanisation is expanding at sort of twice the rate. Twice as many people will live in cities. But they don't have that access to artificial intelligence, nor particularly good data. They don't have good connectivity across the world. Even when we have meetings amongst the Commonwealth, we can't meet online very frequently because they just don't have those internet connections. So yeah, the danger is that it's another thing that allows the developing world to accelerate much more quickly than the developed world to accelerate much more quickly. So yeah, trying to ensure that technology gets to the places that are developing at the moment is really important, because even construction in the UK is not one of the fastest, the fastest growing sectors, but even the construction industry is starting to find multiple ways of using artificial intelligence to make things faster in their production. So yeah, that's your job, I think, in the future.
That's probably quite a good question to finish on. So thank you very much again, everybody, for coming here. And if we could just put our hands together one more time to thank Professor Bonfield. And thank you very much as well to Faye and to Max for introducing Professor Bonfield this evening and for hosting our Q&A, and also to Mr. Donovan at the back as well for doing all of the AV wizardry this evening. And just before I do let you go home for your dinners, our next Enlightening Minds talk, I'm very delighted to say, is happening at the beginning of March it's on Shrove Tuesday, in fact, on Tuesday the 4th of March, back at our usual time of 7:30. We have Dr. Indranil Ghosh coming to talk about inspirational investing. If you are interested in attending that talk, again, in person or online, then do go to the box office website and you can book your ticket then. Thank you very much for coming.